Wanna talk? So let's talk. Here. Talk. You wanna talk? You gotta talk, you need to talk. News talk.
I talk, you talk to Solomon. I talk, you talk to Solomon. Yeah, let's talk to Solomon. Talk to Solomon.
Welcome back to the final sector of Talk to Solomon tonight. Thank you for joining us. Our guest, Dr. Alan Keyes, my co-host.
Chief Steve.
Chief Steve Davis. We are talking about a proposal for a Bill of Rights for the homeless. You have the right to stink. You have the right to defecate on police cars. You have the right to be a burden on society. You have a right to have breath that would melt glass. You have a right to be irresponsible, irascible, and irreconcilable. Am I close here, Dr. Keyes? Have I come up with all the rights?
Well, Stan, I think in this particular case, though, I would start by saying that I don't understand why it is that these folks always go down a road that says we need this Bill of Rights, we need to specify these rights. Unfortunately, in our society, when you take the view that you're going to list somebody's rights, it turns into a list of entitlements that then give them an attitude of privilege, right? And that encourages people to get in your face and say, I am what I am, and you must accept it no matter what. So, as I said at the opening of the show, there is no longer any sense that human beings must treat one another in a way that shows a sense of propriety, that shows that we respect that there are things that it's appropriate to do and things that it's not appropriate to do in our relations with others. So step number one, I think it's a mistake to go down that road. On the other hand, Stan, I don't think it's a mistake to remember that we are a society that is based on the premise of the equal protection of the laws. And the more fundamental premise that we're all created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain rights. And some of those rights have to do with being left unharassed in our condition, if we're poor, if we're deprived, because some of those things are not things that we are called to despise, not called to despise by the God who made us or by the circumstances in which as human beings we ourselves could end up, in which we ought to be practicing the rule that says, I'm going to treat others as I would want to be treated myself in that situation. So at the end of the day, I think there is a proper sense that you're going to teach folks and train people who are police officers and public officials and so forth, that they are to act with that sense of equal justice toward folks, whatever their condition. That their business is not the business of reacting to this or that in order to show the particular prejudices somebody may feel, but they're to represent the truth that the foundation of our laws and our understanding of justice is a foundation that basically says the law is no respecter of persons, but justice requires that those who enforce the law show respect for all persons as it is appropriate in accordance with their duty. I think that's the sort of approach that ought to be taken, rather than an approach that starts to create what I think at the end of the day, Stan, is a specious list of rights. Specious because we have to deal with certain aspects of human behavior with some common sense. The common sense that understands that, no, I don't want to see poor people and homeless people abused simply because of their condition. But on the other hand, I don't want to live in a society that encourages the view that people can show all different kinds of attitudes and disregard for the impact that their neglect even of themselves may have on others, and that others don't have the right to react to that. Either way, we've lost the balance. Either way, we are showing, I think, a lack of both common sense and or common decency. And that's not a road we want to go down. But I'm not sure, Stan, that the answer to that is to try to set up a whole long list of general thises and that at the end of the day will become and be treated as a list of entitlements and privileges that then suspend the need for responsible people to make judgments about what behavior is in fact compatible with the propriety that a decent society requires in public and what the behaviors are not.
Well, let me ask Chief Steve, because you've dealt with individuals, quote unquote homeless, quote unquote vagrants, quote unquote whatever. Chief.
Well, two things. First of all, the first step in the problem-solving formula is to identify the problem. The problem here is not that these people are homeless. And you're right, I have dealt with many homeless people, and almost every single one of them want to be homeless. They don't want a job. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to live that lifestyle. There have been many, many people that, many do-gooders that have tried to get them to go to shelters or go to the places, and they fought that violently or vehemently because they don't want that. They want to be homeless. But also most of them have some type of mental illness or some type of mental disability where they need some type of help. Most areas of the country have closed the hospitals that could have given them service. They no longer exist, which leaves them on the street homeless with only the police to deal with them. And so, but this approach to make some kind of a law like this is not identifying the problem and not helping the problem.
Well, I think that we have here a situation where do-gooders saying they need freedom force them onto the streets where they were not able to deal, those that had the mental challenges, and many of them died, frankly, and I think that was the purpose. They wanted them to die, they wanted them to create chaos, they did both. But I think that we have to couple rights with responsibilities, and of course that's what America is all about. Dr. Keys.
No, I think that that's very true. And I think that that sense of responsibility then requires that you maintain a standard of propriety, a standard of what the norm should be that we are striving to achieve in our behavior in public places toward one another, the kind of influence it may have on children and others who happen to be in our vicinity. I remember, Stan, being at an airport once years ago with the kids, and there was a lady standing there talking on her cell phone, right? And every other word out of her mouth was the F word or a vulgar reference to the sexual organs in one form or another. And she was just going on like this with no regard for anything or anyone. And I think to encourage that sense of abusive, self-centered, devil-may-care approach to how people behave in public and what they think must be tolerated by others in their public behavior. That's not only totally irresponsible on the part of the individual, I think a society is fostering a culture of irresponsibility when it simply takes the attitude that everybody's got to put up with that.
Chief?
Yeah, one thing Dr. Keys mentioned earlier was a heart. And in this case, I want to remind everyone that the government has no heart. It's a government. And so the last thing that these folks need is a heartless government to dictate how they're supposed to be treated or what's supposed to happen to them. They need some type of an agency with a heart, like a medical facility or a Christian church or another type of outreach facility like that, that can help deal with them, but absolutely not the government.
Again, I want to get back to, I have been poor in my life. When my brother and sister and I were growing up, my mother had polio, we had no dad, we had no income, we lived off of welfare. I know what it's like to be basically poor and to not have a lot of food. We had some support around us, so we were better off than some. We were never taught to look at life as other than a blessing and an opportunity to grow, and a time that we would not be like that, and we grew out of it, thank God. But the point is, my mother, may she rest in peace, always said to us, first you have responsibility, and then you have what God has given you, and that is rights. So people should treat you with respect, but you first must treat them with respect. This woman in this airport, if someone had just come up and grabbed her cell phone and thrown it to the floor and broken it, she would have been outraged. But the reality is, she was not being responsible to treating other people. We were always told, you as a Jew, and of course at the time Jews didn't get a lot of respect, you deserve to be treated fairly. But first you must treat other people fairly. You have a responsibility according to the way we were taught. What God wanted us to do is the first step was yours, not theirs. And Dr. Keys, maybe you could respond to that, because I think we have that totally backwards. Totally backwards.
Well, see, I think what you've just said, Stan, is in fact exactly the logic of rights. Rights do not begin, and they are not in the first instance, an assertion of some kind of freedom. People use that misunderstanding all the time in our society now. But it begs a question, doesn't it? Where do your rights come from? How do you derive a sense of what your rights are? Do you have the right to do anything you feel like it? That's the question people will ask. Well, why is it then that there are certain rights that have to be respected? And the reason that we make that distinction is because we've lost a sense of the origin of rights. The origin of rights is exactly where you put your finger on it. The origin of rights is this thought: I have a responsibility. A responsibility to whom? A responsibility to the God who made me, right? And I have within me a conscience that represents my inclination to follow the will of God. When I am acting in a conscientious way to acquit my responsibilities to God, it is right that I should do what I do, and what I do accords with what is right, as understood by that conscience which corresponds to God's will. And it is that derivation that actually explains why we use the term right. Why would you use a word that refers to that which is right if what you are talking about is that which you choose to do, whether it's wrong or right? That doesn't make any sense. The word right leads us to have to think through the relationship between the freedom we're exercising and the responsibility that the action we are taking exemplifies. And if we are in fact responding to, answering to, being responsible for and before the one who has determined the path of right, then we are acting with right, and we exercise the right in what we are doing, and we therefore have the right to continue what we do. The whole thing begins, as you pointed out, however, with our understanding of the responsibility from which that right is derived. And if we are disregarding our responsibilities, we are destroying our rights.
Now, it's absolutely true what you're saying, and let me go to the Chief. Chief, throughout your lifetime of service to the public and law enforcement, and the hundreds of thousands and millions of men and women who have served, you guys are asked, and I don't know how you do it, because I would last on the job 30, 40 seconds before I would be breaking the rules. You guys are asked to treat people right when they, in not all cases, but in many cases, are acting wrong. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, you are. And I think back on my early days in law enforcement, one of the first things that happened to me was going to training and being taught about the Constitution and the rights that people have, and that we were hired there to protect people's rights. That stuck with me my whole career. So even though people are accused of a crime, they're innocent until proven guilty, we were supposed to treat them with respect and also with the least amount of physical force necessary to apprehend them if they were accused of breaking the law until their court case took an effect. Now, that to me was very significant, because I joined the police department not realizing that I was signing up to really be the defender of the Constitution. And when that first class told me that, it was a very significant part of my law enforcement career.
Alan, no one has been a more eloquent understander of and defender of the concepts that the Constitution embody than Alan Keyes. And there are many people in government, there are many people in law enforcement, there are many people in the private sector, so to speak, many people in the public sector who don't understand that this country was based on a mutual, let me say this right, a mutual love of God expressed in respect for God's creation. Am I close?
No, I think that's exactly right. It's a love of God that then expresses itself by accepting God's love for his creation and following the will of God, the benevolent will of God, which of course corresponds to the good of that creation, because his will is that the created being should be there, right? That the world should be And so he has built into nature the way the world is, ways of activities that correspond to what's required in order to keep it going according to his will. And so I think that's exactly right what you said. We are in fact called upon out of our love of God to respect that which God has created, and especially, of course, to respect that which, according to his will for creation, represents his own image and likeness in the world, which is our fellow human beings. And it's one of the reasons, Stan, by the way, that I think we have what we call the presumption of innocence. You're innocent till proven guilty, because we're assuming, since you are a creature of God, that you correspond to his will, right? Until by your own action, which then reflects your willingness to accept or reject that will of God, you show that you are not someone who is acting according to that will. And that's where the presumption of innocence comes from. We are, in fact, taking that stand because we respect God. And because we are called by that respect to assume that his creation reflects his benevolent will, until by something that happens as a result of our experience in that creation, we are led to think otherwise. And of course, where you're dealing with human beings, Stan, there's that added element of responsibility, because in making us in a way that reflects who he is, I think God included a reflection of the freedom of his will. So we have that freedom to act or not to act in ways that are compatible with the inclinations he has put in our nature. And when we choose to reject them, we go down a path that is wrong, not right. And those who encounter us then in the midst of that wrong will make the assumption that we're innocent, but when we harden them as a result of our wrongdoing, then they will act in response to that wrong. And that's exactly, I think, the attitude that corresponds to what the chief was taught in terms of law enforcement, because law enforcement actually represents that. It represents the assumption that you are here by God's will until by your own will you show that you have rejected it. But it also represents the truth that the law enforcement officer is ultimately in our system not the one who will make the judgment that you have so erred. And so the only force to be used on you is the force that's necessary to make sure that you're going to be present at your trial.
All right, now I'm going to go off the reservation here for a moment and talk about something that is kind of near and dear to me, and that is, ready? The local post office. There was this big discussion. The post offices got all kinds of problems and losing money, but the Constitution calls for the government to provide postal service. And their answer, of course, was to close thousands of local post offices and create mega centers, more efficiency. Now, I go to post offices regularly because I'm in the book business. I find the experience at post offices to be a very nice one. The overwhelming majority of the people are nice, and they provide a very personalized service, and they try and help you. And I find, now I'm older than most, but older people tend to use post offices more than younger people. People without means of transportation and the like go to their local post offices. And the thought that they were going to close these thousands and thousands of post offices, to me, was exactly wrong. Exactly wrong. At any rate, they've now made the decision they're not going to close any of them. They're going to keep them all open. They're going to come up with a different way to save money. They're going to have to, increase postage or whatever the case may be. I applaud that. I think the post office needs to make some changes, but the change shouldn't be that we'll stop serving the people. The change should be, we'll be more interested in serving people than in building layers of bureaucracy and serving ourselves. Anyone care to comment, or is that just my own little thought?
Well, I can say, go ahead, Dr. Keys, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I actually agree with that. And I think that, make a long story short, we watch things like this happen, Stan, at least in part, for two reasons. One, we've allowed the government to get involved in all kinds of things that are not its business. And so we spend billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of dollars trying to perform a task through a government bureaucracy that requires qualities of human heart and spirit that bureaucracies are not supposed to have. And we've taken those responsibilities away from the churches, institutions of faith, and associations based on charitable intentions and impulses that are supposed to do them. And the chief mentioned this not long ago. I think he's just absolutely right. If you would curtail all these things we're not supposed to be doing through the bureaucratic instrument, then we'd have much less trouble finding the resources that are needed to fund the things that government's supposed to be doing. And even in the day of the email and the FedEx and so forth and so on, I think we need to keep in mind that one of the reasons that this is a government function, right, that can be modified to a degree when you have a very advanced civilization, but since calamity can always occur and difficulties can always arise, part of the reason that the government took over things like the postal system is because you had to be able to deliver that mail through all kinds of circumstances and conditions, which would then require that you have the kind of forces, if I can put it that way, that only the government had. And so it is part of the business of keeping order in a way that allows citizens to go about their business that the postal function is related to. So I think we are losing a sense of the proper role of government. And sometimes it's good to get back to basics so that you can identify some of those functions that when you're cutting the government back to its essentials would still be there.
Chief?
A couple of tidbits. First of all, my mother retired from the post office as a postal clerk. She spent many years there and got a pension. I was actually a postal letter carrier before I was involved in law enforcement. And I can still remember, the happiness I felt, being out and delivering people's mail and doing my government service and bringing them their mail, even the bills. But I didn't realize then that I was being paid for by tax dollars. And so a couple things that I know now, being older and being more in tune with this, and as you said, it's a constitutional directive to have the post office. That's fine. But if that's the case, then they don't need to have a union that can go on strike. Because I was only at the post office a few months when the postal union threatened to go on strike and not deliver any mail. So they shouldn't be allowed to do that. Also, government pensions cannot be paid for by the current employees. It takes 5 employees to pay for 1 pension. So if we're going to maintain a post office, we've got to be have a better mechanism to fund those pensions so the employees can be paid without disrupting the taxpayers' funds adversely like they do now.
I agree. I don't think postal workers are overpaid. I think the post office has dramatically more bureaucracy and layers of management than it needs, and it all could be simplified, and I think that is frankly the answer. But anyway, I want to end on a positive note, and in New Jersey, 3rd graders were asked on their examinations, 3rd graders, let's see, that's 6, 8-year-olds, tell us a secret that you've been told to keep, and tell us why it's been difficult to keep. Now, 8-year-olds are not exactly adults. I'm sure that many a family laundry was exposed. I'm sure that many a thing was said. Things that once is said in the school can be acted upon and by law must be acted on if something is said, whether or not it's true. And there was incredible outrage, even in New Jersey, which is an outrageous state, frankly, and has an outrageous governor. But now they have agreed that was inappropriate. We got a couple of minutes here, Alan. Why is that inappropriate? Your thoughts?
Well, in all fairness, Stan, I have to start by saying, I was partly raised in New Jersey, have relatives and friends in New Jersey. I think New Jersey has a lot of things to be said for it. So I wouldn't want to sit here and be silent while you suggest that New Jersey is kind of this or that, this way or that. I mean, all the states have their ups and downs, but New Jersey has some marvelous people and some wonderful places, and I actually go back and forth there with some frequency, and have always found it to be a place I like returning to. So much for New Jersey. Beyond that, I think, Stan, what you say, I mean, it opens a large issue to me, because it's the issue that, whether it's exemplified in that California bill we talked about, where they want to take children away because the parents are raising them up in the way that they should go, according to their biblical beliefs, or whether it's a situation like this, an utter disrespect for what ought to be the boundaries of the invasion of the responsibility and authority that God, not the state, has endowed parents with. Those are natural rights that are then exemplified in the authority and role of parents. And I think that we have been going down a road for years that systematically disrespects those basic natural rights, culminating, of course, in things like gay marriage and whatever, because people have no understanding of the basic obligations from which those rights come, that society has no right to interfere with or suspend. And so I think that this is actually a very serious point that you've made, and I think it's something that we ought to find outrageous. Insofar as we have schools that are under are being run by the government, those schools ought to be premised on respecting the proper role and authority of parents, and also the sanctity, to use the proper word, of the home. Because family is an institution of God. It's an institution that it predates what we call civil society. And when governments come into being, they come into being, as our declaration said, to secure these rights, these unalienable rights that are built into our nature. And there are no better examples of those rights than the rights that are associated with the natural family.
Chief, your final thought.
Just want to remind everybody that 90% or more of the monies used to support schools comes from local communities, but about 90% or more of the rules are imposed by the federal government. The federal government has no business involved in education whatsoever. Matter of fact, I believe government should be involved in education, period. We just visited a school locally here about a week or so ago, a private school, where the children are taught good moral values and also taught other things like every kid must play a musical instrument, an additional bonus besides reading and mathematics and science. So, but the government has no heart. Their agenda is only merely to indoctrinate children. They don't care if the kids learn any math or not. So we must get the government out of our education system.
Dr. Keys, just a 30-second good night.
Well, I just want to say, again, a word of praise for the Chief. Both, Chief, in what you have tried to do as a citizen in public life, but also just in the wonderful common sense and decent heart that you exemplify in your career and in the time that you spend with us. So I just want to say thank you, and I hope that you look back upon and move forward with a real sense of pride and dedication, because I think that you have deserved it from us all.
Well, thank you. The skirmish may have been lost this time, but the battle is still afoot.
The battle is still afoot, and speaking of foot, I've taken mine out of my mouth long enough to say good night, Dr. Keys, good night, Chief, and good night, America.